We're working our way through the functions in our model code that inefficiently call the getProductsAll function. That worked fine when we were using a simple array, but we really should streamline these functions now that we're using a database. We have a getProductsCount function that counts the total number of products so we know how many pages of shirts to show on the shirts listing page. Let's refactor that function next. Open products.php in your text editor and scroll down to the getProductsCount function. This function calls getProductsAll, which queries the database and returns an array with all the products. This then uses PHP's count function to count the elements in the array. But we can do this more efficiently by getting the count straight from MySQL. We'll start by including the database file. Then we'll add our familiar try-catch block. We'll again want to load all the results from a query into a PDO statement object. Our database object was created in the database include file, so we can call methods on it here. We want to execute a query. As you'll see, we don't have any user input, so there's no need to use the prepare method here. We don't need all the product information in this query, so I'll just put one column in the select statement. This query would retrieve all the products in the database, but we don't really need all of them. We just need to know how many there are total. We can use an aggregate function to achieve this. With the count function, this query will group all the individual rows from the main query down into just one row with just one value, the count of the rows. For more information on count and other aggregate functions like this, I would recommend you check out the SQL Calculating, Aggregating, and Other Functions badge in the Database Foundations course. We called the query method here, so we should already have one row with one element in the results object. We could extract this count using the fetch or the fetchAll method, but let me show you a new method that's available in PDO statement objects. The fetchColumn method will fetch just a single column as a simple variable instead of the whole row as an array. If you only need to get one column from a row, this works nicely. The fetchColumn method takes one parameter, the number of the column you want to retrieve. In our case, it's the first and only column. This is 0 indexed, so the first column is 0. You might have noticed that some things like bindParam start counting at 1, while others start counting at 0. You might also be wondering how in the world you're supposed to keep them straight. The simple answer is, you don't. You can always check the documentation for each method, or feel free to just try one and see what happens. If you get the wrong column, then try the other one. After a while of working with certain methods, you'll start to remember which arguments they receive. Let's display this value to the screen. The shirts listing page calls this function, so we can visit that page to see the output. The return value here is a string, which might seem a little strange since a count would always be a number. Data comes from MySQL into PHP as strings. If you are working with a value that you know should be in a format other than string, you may want to convert it to that format. A count will always be an integer. We can change the value we receive from the fetchColumn method to an integer like this. We have 32 products in the database, and now we have an integer with a value of 32. Instead of displaying this to the screen, we should return this value back to the code that calls the function. Let's take a look in the browser now. The shirts listing page calls the getProductsCount function to determine how many total pages there are. That seems to be working correctly still, with links to 4 total pages being displayed. We've now refactored the getProductsCount function. That's 2 done and 2 to go. Let's next tackle the getProducts subset function. This will use limit again, but in a new way.